Today, I'm thrilled to be chatting with our ACE international partners in South Africa. All of them are members of the South African Guild of Editors, and here they are to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Melissa Parry. I'm an offline editor of 20 years. I work across all genres, documentary, fiction, TV series. I've worked on feature films. I work with artists. I've done wildlife.
I'm Vuyani Sondlo, and I'm an editor with over 25 years of experience. I've worked in almost all genres, but lately I'm working mostly in scripted, particularly feature films.
My name is Ula. I'm a TV script mainly editor for the last 20 years. I'm from Johannesburg, and I also run a post-production facility here in Johannesburg.
My name is Nikki Comninos. I'm an editor with also 20 years of experience, offline editor. I've worked in different genres at the beginning of my career, but I pretty much only work in documentary at this point. And I've transitioning into straddling both directing and editing at the moment.
What kind of industry is it?
It's a huge difference from where we were, say, 10 years ago, in terms of the volume of the stuff that's being made. And part of it is because of the streaming services, but also the co-productions for feature films, which are more and more coming and happening here. As to the industry itself, it's more of a government-propelled industry as opposed to like a private sector investment. So government plays a huge role in terms of supporting the industry in various ways, from the DTI rebates, as well as trying to get some form of trainings happening and stuff. So we are largely dependent on, say, government funding, almost like in a European style, like the French sort of, do the stuff. But in a nutshell, I would say the industry has grown from about 10 years ago. Yes, there's still room to grow further. There are problems in terms of pay parity and all of that, but we are in a situation where we're finding ourselves doing more meaningful work, which is very important.
Are a lot of the films local?
There is a combination. I mean, there's a lot of local films which are done, and sometimes they don't directly go to the cinemas, they just go to the streaming services. And that's probably the nature of the distribution we find ourselves now.
The features I've cut, some have had cinema releases. A lot of them sort of traveled the film festival circuit on a global scale. It's quite tricky because then you're still in the situation of needing to sell the film.
There's also been a lot of originals which are made, and this is where Netflix has sort of come in, as well as Showmax. And this is probably where then the discrepancy between films which are made and end up at the cinemas and the ones that are going directly to the streamers is because the nature of it is such that it's a commission, so to speak. So it will go to either Showmax or either Netflix or whoever is commissioning it.
When I was there, Johannesburg was the filmmaking mecca and Cape Town was the service industry. So a lot of films were being filmed in Cape Town, but the country didn't really benefit from it because it would immediately leave the country after they were filming. Is that still happening?
The films that are coming in are starting to use a little bit more of the local post.
Oh, wow.
Because
okay.
before they used to shoot and just go home and go and do. It might be minimal, but things like dailies, for instance, and maybe to a certain extent, let's say an assembly of some sort. So by the time they go wherever they're going, there is a little bit of post that has been sort of started here, which has been beneficial in a sense that we learn practices.
Joburg is still much more of a local hub, and Cape Town is still like traditionally the service industry, but the local industry in Cape Town has sort of come up more. And I think both COVID and the US strike and contraction has affected Cape Town, and the kind of like facility, daily kind of work that was going through there.
So it affects the service industry more than it affects the local industry.
Yeah, I would say so. I think there's still a hesitancy to maybe bring on editors into like the international features that are filming here, but there is much more involvement with assistant editors, assembly editors, and those kinds of roles in those service jobs.
So when you speak of an assembly editor, you're talking about somebody who is assembling the dailies so that they know they're not missing anything.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, I just wanted
That's also a slightly new role that's entered our local industry in the last year or so, because the local Netflix jobs have introduced assembly editors into the editing teams.
Why would they need an assembly editor if they have an editing team?
It's someone who's taking all the material, the print takes, and presenting an edit to show the range of footage versus a cut that's driving particular narrative.
I just did something for Netflix now, so it doesn't affect me as an editor. It's more for Netflix itself as they are shooting, as opposed to see what's being shot and keep abreast in terms of the production itself. But once I got in, then I start from scratch with my assistant.
So do you start at the same time as this assembly editor, or are you coming on later?
I came in a little bit later because it's a series, and when you're cutting later episodes, they haven't shot everything that you need.
Yeah.
So then I came later, but then I came early in terms of reading the scripts and input and all of that. So that's where then the assembly was being sent as they were shooting. So they were sending sort of scenes.
Yeah.
So you could say in the olden days would be screening dailies kind of a thing, but in a way that it's put together. So I would akin it to that. But once they finished shooting everything and it was ready for my episode, then I came in, then I just start from scratch.
I guess maybe to some degree picking up if they liking the style of how it's being shot and the performances as well. If there's any like red herrings there.
It wouldn't happen in the US because the industry is so old. But then what's happening, because Netflix and all these companies, it's sort of new, it's a new territory for them. So you could say it, along with introducing certain ways that they work, they still feel like they can't maybe fully trust.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
and
it's unfamiliar.
Perhaps,
it's unfamiliar to them.
Yes, it's unfamiliar to them. So they need to do things that makes them feel at ease. That's what I would think it is.
Showmax is more open to allowing the various production houses to operate within their own ways of working.
Okay, so it's more, so for Netflix, it's like a workflow issue. They want their workflow to be used, whereas Showmax and other broadcasters in South Africa are more free about that.
Totally. With Netflix, it's a workflow thing.
Yeah.
And they have a much more complicated workflow that demands a lot more points of like engagement. So also a very new role in our industry is the post-production supervisor. Like sounds strange, but true. I think for me, post-production supervisors became more integral in my daily life from about 2019. Before that, they were much more on the facility end when I was handing over projects for finishing, and they were like more employees of facilities. Whereas now, if I'm on a TV series with Netflix, post-production supervisors on like from the beginning right to the end, of the whole production. I'm much more focused in on being creative, and rather than trying to wrangle I haven't received this archive, or, you know, whatever the situation may be, that's taken me out of like thinking about narrative.
Ula, for you, because you're actually a facility, so do you have a full-time post-production supervisor?
We do, yes.
Okay.
And again, I think everything guys said are correct. So I think the thing that's really great from what Netflix and the new guys in the game brought in is that there was always, as a facility, from back in the year 10, like I said, 10, 15 years ago, when we put in a budget and say, we have a supervisor or we have a sound designer. You don't believe how many channels go, what does a sound designer do? Isn't that the editor's job? Why do you mix? Can't you do it? Like, there was a lot of really, really weird little things where, like I said, the standardization was very all over the place. And I think what is lovely about the Netflix side of it is it's kind of setting a bar for international standard. Look, the budgets are different, but at least it's a bar where the other channels can kind of aim for and say there is standard practice. There should be an offline editor. There's something like a colorist. The editor can't also do that. We have graphics. We have final mixers. We have sound designers. And all of those people have amazing skills. I think that's what's great. So now, especially, I think supervisors are the new thing. People are seeing, wow, shows are running on better budgets. It's more on time. It's looking great because you have a dedicated person that's running your show for you. So yeah, absolutely we do that. And that's a very good positive thing. That's kind of standard.
I think the industry globally is impacted by streamers, is impacted by audience tastes, by cameras being affordable. You know, all sorts of things have impacted us making professional, good shows. The like proliferation of series as something new as opposed to cinema. You know, it's not only that you know, there's problems with access to cinemas, but also it's audiences and smartphones and choices and stuff like that. So while I think Netflix has had a big input, and I don't want to take away from that, I think it's also important to know that organically some things have happened globally, which we can all relate to, and also some things that have happened from South African input. You know, there's a lot of local content that is on TV, on SABC, and on Showmax, and on other smaller platforms within multi-choice bouquet. On the internet, for example, people are making web series and stuff like that. So, you know, there's an energy that is also coming locally that isn't just a top-down influence. And I think it's important for us as South Africans to recognize that as well.
I want to say, I think the reason Netflix is making as much content in South Africa is because we had the infrastructure already. We had the talent already. We had the creativity already. It's a no-brainer, right? And that's why there's such a big drive for them to make as much content as they do here. It's not to say that they're bringing the talent pool. They're just bringing a different, more studio style of working, which maybe a lot of us hadn't engaged before. Like through the wildlife editing I've done, I'd interacted with Nat Geo and Discovery and those studios. And that is also very much a situation where the workflow was left to the production company, but the creative input was more aligned to kind of the creative input I kind of received from Netflix.
I mean, perhaps the way to look at it is, as Melissa said, the talent was already here, and even if they were not operating here, we would still make films. However, I think what we should recognize, because what we're trying to do, even with our respective bodies, SAGE and, you know, is to try and create an industry which is sustainable. So what they have done with their practices, in my view, is that they have sort of now solidified the industry. It's almost like even when you go to government funding, it's not as hard as it used to be. You know, before you know, it used to be like, but you are not an important sector. I mean, what, you make films. now it is seen as part of the economy. But also on the other side, they've created, say, a face, so to speak, that we know as creatives we are going to have a long relationship with in terms of negotiating with them. So they have solidified the industry, and we can make a living out of that. So that is the good part of it. As far as talent, I agree with Nikki, I agree with Melissa that it has always been here. And even if Netflix wasn't around, we would still make films. We'll find a way.
So you're saying that you can make a living, so it has improved.
If I have to speak for myself, I can make a living out of it. But also the budget have increased. Just from the perception, I can see quite a lot of people that they can make a living. And maybe what we should be doing is adopting what you said about trying to find a way where we could communicate amongst ourselves so we can know who's being paid what or what is the general rate out there. And maybe then we can start seeing everybody being compensated almost equally.
I think the complication that we can never escape is that we live in the most unequal country in the world, and we have one of the highest unemployment rates. So it's difficult to assess our industry in that exact way, because I agree with you, Vuyani, like people can make a living, but if you look at how many people are actually employed, not in the film industry, but in this country, it makes everything very competitive. And I think it's a particular environment that other countries with better functioning employment levels don't experience in the same way. So it's, we are burdened by being the most unequal country in the world, and it filters into our industry, but not only our industry. I think breaking into the industry is the hardest thing. Getting a job in South Africa is a really difficult thing to do. And as the Editors Guild, and Melissa can attest to this, we have people emailing us, emerging editors, year after year after year, who are just never getting their first break. And it's really horrible. And I like I say, you can't dislocate it from the economy that South Africa is in, but it obviously affects our industry.
I think there's a lot of things actually moved further away from each other. I feel with the coming of the big streamers, you kind of have a cream, like top percent of very talented people getting paid fairly, but the bottom half has kind of fell out. If I think with my father that we ran a company for the last 30 years, there was generally like 15, 16 post facilities that did a lot of work. If I think my direct competition, there's 3 left. Like all the post facilities are closing down. And exactly like, where's the young new? I get so many CVs every week. And it's just, there's not enough work to get where I, back in the day with the budgets, could bring a show and you bring in 2 junior assistant editors just to get the foot in the door, train them on a show, work their way up assistants. Like the budgets on shows, we now handed in a budget for a show. And literally the budget is 12% less of what we did that drama 12 years ago. Like the budgets have really shrunk. So there's no more margins, but now we're shooting on 4K and the drives are bigger and everybody wants colorist. And like, so I kind of feel the top end is great. Like we're really growing the bar, the quality is going up. My concern is that young guys, so I grew up in the industry. I grew up on a jip, giving coffee to everybody and stuff like. So where does the young guys come in? Where's the 40 telenovelas running so you can sit on a set, work your way up? So in 20 years, I'm working as a Netflix editor. The industry feels like in some way it kind of shrank. There's not enough work. And where does this young guys come in? Where do they get experience? Because if you are not one of the lucky guys that get put on as assistant editor on your first job on Netflix, how do you break in? So I feel there's a little bit of a, like Nikki said, the gap feels like it's harder to get in for me. It feels like there's the leads and the bottom. There's no middle section. yeah, that's kind of the experience I had the last 15 years.
And I think even if you have the appetite to take somebody on for training, I mean, it's something that we've spoken about as the Editors Guild as well, is to try and get mentorship. I mean, your turnaround is so fast, you don't even have time to go to the bathroom or eat lunch. Now, to try and imagine meaningfully having somebody sitting in the edit suite with you does feel almost impossible, you know? So, and it also, to be fair, it shouldn't be the burden of an individual editor to do that. It should be a functional, structural thing that happens. But yeah, I think it is tricky that, you know, I think we all had the experiences where we were invited on as interns and could learn. And I don't think that is happening as much anymore.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you all have assistants?
No, it's tricky because I've worked on projects recently where there's no real tangible assistant, and then I've worked on other projects where the assistant starts before me and ends after me. So it's very, as much as I like working with them, it's quite difficult to take them onto my next project, but I might see them on the project after that, you know.
Wow, that's fascinating to me. Vuyani, do you work with a full-time assistant?
Yeah, I do.
You do.
Mm.
So is it's a budgetary concern then, that sometimes there just isn't a budget for an assistant?
I think so.
Or else there's budget to have an assistant at the beginning and then maybe at the end of a project, but not while you're editing, not helping you source materials or maybe like do some creative elements of an assembly or a sound lay, you know, so that they could learn and you could give feedback.
Like I have a facility, so if you have a few shows, we kind of have a little stepping stone where you have your junior guys starting just learning how to ingest stuff, and if you get their second assistant and up to the point where I will have one or two guys that kind of knows if I'm working on a Netflix kind of show, what this level, they know the workflow, they know what's expected. They can work at that level. If I can't do a scene, they will be good enough to kind of cover for you like that level, and then downwards, and everybody underneath them as you're like their mentorship. You look after somebody underneath you. So you kind of try and build that little 4-generational gap where hopefully people can up. But like I said, it's difficult with small budgets where now you have to carry like a lot of hats. You're kind of the assistant editor and the B editor, and you're kind of the ingest, but you're also the online. So it's hard, but I think that's kind of the only way we kind of give back, try to teach people. Like I said, it is meaningful to sit with somebody and go through a scene and say, cut it to me 40 times in different versions. That's how you learn. And usually, well, you have to cut a feature film in 2 days, and like, where do you get time for that? Yeah. So I think I'm very proud. Like, I think 4 of my assistants all now editing for Netflix.
What you were all talking about earlier when you said in the industry, like in Cape Town, where there's a lot of service industry and there are assistant editors being hired, right, to prepare the dailies and whatever, and the assembly editors, are those new routes where people can come up, or are those people in a different category, and the two, they're not mixing in sort of your indigenous side of the industry?
I think they're at a different level. Okay. I think that kind of assistant editing requires like a different skill set, like highly technical problem solving. You know, it can involve creativity, but it's not necessarily easy to compare that kind of assistant editor to an assistant editor on a local show. I think they're starting to meet each other in terms of what's expected and the skills required and the work put in. It's no longer, let's say, just somebody who ingests your media. And yeah, so I think the local industry assistant editor and the service industry assistant, that's starting to become a similar job description where it wasn't before. When I started in the industry, it was at that point when Final Cut 7 really came onto the scene, and so a lot of production companies decided that they wanted to have their own edit suites rather than going to an edit facility, which changed the landscape that we work in significantly, because for a long time it meant that assistant editors were really just ingesting material at night on the computer you worked on during the day. And so track laying, assembly edits, creative, just wasn't time or scope to do that. And so I think that's where the fallout really happened, with kind of what Ulo mentioned, like the top level and then everyone else sort of coming up, and there being no middle section in the industry really at the moment, you know.
But I also think, you know, the institutions like learning institutions, film schools, we don't prepare like graduates the way we should. So people leave thinking that they should just move straight into a cutting job, which shouldn't be the case. And it does two things. It may well disappoint them when they're not getting jobs and they feel despondent, or they might get jobs, but then at a lower rate. So we're going back into compensation. And the producers are feeling like, well, we have somebody who just did his or her master's at AFTA and stuff like that, and they're just as good. So why should I pay you what you want me to pay you? So that's where the issue becomes. But again, I go back because I teach sometimes at these schools, and it's not necessarily about editing itself, but it's about the culture itself within the industry. You know, there are things you learn by just watching, listening, and those are the things that will probably help you to have a longer career.
It is an industry, like Nikki, you were saying that you move between editing and directing. South Africa does have an industry that is a lot more flexible to do different things. So when you say you're splitting your time, is it easy to do that?
I find it very enriching, and I find it very challenging, and I'm much more comfortable as an editor because I have much more experience. Documentary is always a little bit different, you know, all the systems are very different to fiction. I would guess that you are more intimate with everybody because the teams are smaller and you know, all kinds of reasons. So I would guess it has something to do with documentary that crossover happened.
Yes, I also think because in documentary, the editor is often instrumental in basically building the structure and telling the story. It's a luxury if you have a script, you know. Often you just are given, you know, hundreds of hours of footage and you are sculpting the documentary. So you are, in a sense, already operating as a director.
Yes, and I think that the relationship is closer because your director will say to you, you know, what questions should I ask this character, or what shots are we missing, or let's brainstorm stuff. I don't have a huge amount of experience in fiction, so I can't answer that, but I don't know if that happens as much in the fiction space. I think you work a little bit more separately, but maybe you guys can, the other editors, my colleagues, can answer that because I don't really know.
I think with how many dramas have I done? Probably 40 dramas in my life. Probably only 4 of them have I been brought in at the scripts phase. We're like, this is what the story is about. What do you think we're going to do? And so you kind of are very reactive in most of the things. So it's not as much, you don't have that much say of like, wow, I see what you kind of want to do in this scene. Hey, director, why don't you think of shooting it like this? And I can help you. That's very rare. That's amazing when it happens. It's really great. But mostly it's kind of, here's the footage. This is what we kind of try to do. Can you execute? Oh, you have 2 weeks less. Go. That's very much the push. It's really, really push and try and get a story out of the time, because it's usually shot so quickly that you kind of just have to deal with the footage what it is. That makes it very creative for me. Like, you wow, how do we get out of this? But yeah, that's kind of what I found from the scripted side.
Is that all of your experience, that you get brought in at such a late stage?
Mostly, I would say I get brought in at a late stage, or maybe even if I'm brought onto the project early, I don't necessarily have involvement at being at a read-through or giving script notes.
I come in early on, and there's consultation even at an early stage and stuff like that. So yeah, I do.
And Nikki, do you get brought in early?
Yes, I think so. I think that I have, over the years, I have close working relationships. I think it happens with everybody. You sort of get your main clients, and I have a couple people that I have worked with over time. So yes, I guess I'm reiterating what other people are saying, and it makes sense. It's human nature. You ask opinion of people you feel safe with, and you can trust, and you have a shorthand. I think that was my biggest learning as a director. I wish I could go back and see how I acted as an editor, because I feel like, having been a director, I know now how to be a much better support to a director, because it's a very vulnerable thing. And I think that's maybe also why people, it's not necessarily that they don't care about edit, it's nerve-wracking, and to expose yourself as wanting, people can perceive it in different ways, so I think there's a guardedness that's not necessarily from a lack of a desire to engage, but I think the creative process drives us all crazy.
How did you behave as an editor, Nikki?
Well, now I'm very supportive, and I don't know if I was supportive enough before. Now I'm like, hi, you're doing great.
While we're on the subject of being supportive, how inclusive is your industry in terms of women and just generally inclusive?
I think the structures of society are within South Africa. I mean, we have a legacy of apartheid that has not been completely transformed. I think we are all under the iron fist of patriarchy. I think it's there. But having said that, I have many powerful female colleagues like Melissa Parry and others that I see working well. But yeah, I mean, I think that we suffer from global issues, but put it to the floor as well for others to engage.
My story is so weird, because I'm probably the worst one to answer this, because my experience has been so skewed and weird, because every break I got was, I only worked with female directors. All my editors worked with me were female. And I know nobody else has that story. And for me, it grew up like all my mentors, everybody I grew up with was just female editors. And I was like, there's a reason why Thomas Kunmark is number one, because it's just editing, it's just female. And that's literally, for so long, I thought that's how it was. It's like, I'm this very weird one man in the little bubble where I lived. All my directors, all the editors, all the assistants were just female. And I felt like the outsider. It was such a weird thing. And then you get in the industry like, oh, wait, hold on. So I have a very weird bubble. Like, I was very privileged to grow up within this maternal editing fraternity.
For me, I have a perception that the space of the offline editor is predominantly female, and the space of the online editor and the colorist and the dailies operator are more male. So I think there's a mix overall, but there are things that I also see that concern me. So I don't see what I would feel is a significant number of Black female editors. I see there are a lot of Black female assistant editors, but I don't see Black female editors coming through. I feel patriarchy sometimes in a micro-aggressive way. I guess that relates what Nikki was saying about our society. It is more patriarchal. I think generally the film industry overall is more patriarchal, but the space within post-production of offline editing does have a more female presence. And yeah, it's kind of hard to really pin down some of these things and the reasons for them.
Don't you think that is also a little bit of a stereotype that the offline editors are female and most of the online editors and the colorists are male because it's perceived as much more technical?
Yeah, I mean, we recently did a demographics survey though within the South African Guild of Editors, and we definitely skew more female as an organization. And looking at the organization that represents the colorists and VFX artists and online, it's like very male, but maybe it naturally sort of skews that way because of, like you say, like men feeling more comfortable with technology, or people feeling more comfortable with men with technology.
In technology, yes.
And it also feeds into a pay gap. I mean, those are the spaces where your daily rate is higher for various reasons, but I wonder if that is also a bias that, as we know globally, there is a huge gender pay gap. So I wonder if that's also feeding into that bias, like you say, Avril.
Do you generally spend a lot of time with directors?
Really varies from show to show. Like I said, it's a lot of shows where you barely see the director, or they'll just send a frame out, let's view it. But generally not. Most shows and dramas I edit, you get like a day, maybe two, and that's it. That's kind of the standard.
Okay.
We get. But you do get, I did just came up with a show where you have a lot of constant access to a director. So they with you the whole step of the way.
Okay. So it varies, in other words, it varies quite widely.
Yes. But mostly in my experience, like you don't get, it's not that much. The turnovers, I'm too scared to tell you guys how quick it turns. It is so fast. Like we did a drama now for Showmax, 13-hour, and again, from start editing to delivering was 9 weeks, 13 eps. Everything included.
All 13?
All 13. Everything.
Wow.
So it's really fast. So you have a half a day with the director, and that's it. And you have to move on.
How many editors were on that?
2.
13 episodes. Oh, wow.
That's the worst one for you.
Yeah.
So here's the worst one for you. I just finished the 52-episode drama series. 52 hours, did it in 52 weeks. So one a week.
One a
for
week.
A whole year. One editor.
Sure.
Wow.
Never had it that bad, but I'm thinking back to when I started in the industry and worked with the SABC, and it was, if you were doing a 48-minuter, you got 2 weeks, edit, direct, channel, everything. And if you're doing a 24-minuter, you got 1 week. And there were 1 or 2 shows where you had to go into like 7 days or 8 days for the 24 minutes, just because it was a bit more complex, or maybe there were more notes for a particular episode. But that was kind of where I started. And I think back, I'm like, how did I do it? But I think it was an interesting training ground for making good decisions fast. And so there's something there in being able to like assess footage quickly and get an assembly down, and then take the time to really go back and evaluate like the moments, now that I get more time to do a show, and question like why, how, or okay, we're moving the scene and actually let's just completely rework it.
Exactly. We kind of made it, let's go. Yeah.
That experience differ when you're on a feature?
Yeah, the features I've worked on have all been independently like fundraised. I've not done a feature film for a streamer, so I wouldn't have a point of comparison. But I guess because of the South African market and because of global appetite or lack thereof for certain kind of South African films, you are stuck with limited time constraints. I haven't had the opportunity to work on a bigger film where like time wasn't a consideration. It's sort of, if I think back, probably like 18 weeks was the longest I spent on a film. The shortest, maybe 8.
Vuyani, the difference for you between editing something like Vaya and then working on a Disney film?
Well, because I was working with the same director,
Director.
there wasn't that much difference. The only difference became the process,
Okay.
which would be, the Hollywood style and more time and much more engagement with basically the producers and the studio in terms of like the feedback and stuff like that, which was great. I mean, it was great. But in terms of like the approach, we had been on it for several films, so we have a rapport.
Yes.
In terms of our working process. So it was good in that sense that we already had that. But I mean, talking about doing Netflix now, then I appreciate what Netflix is trying to bring aboard. It just makes you to concentrate on the creative, which is something I highly appreciate. And the other thing, I mean, the biggest thing, and we normally talk about it, me and Akin, was the level of support. It was so good. I mean, it because it was also, I mean, it's a bigger stage than where we have been. So naturally you have like these kind of doubts. But then when you get to a situation where you feel the support, then we flourish under that support. And it's an experience that I'll never forget.
All of you, are you valued as editors? Are you respected? Are you valued?
So we all say no and stand up and I think it varies again.
I think so. I think that there is a thing that happens with younger editors, and I remember feeling this a lot when I was younger, where you are used as a tool. But I don't feel that way anymore.
When you say used as a tool, you mean somebody says to you, cut there, cut there, cut there.
Or like how Melissa was saying with the SABC, like you have 1 week for 24 minutes. And then like, I remember having the experience where like you would sit there with the commissioning editor and they would only speak to the director. Meanwhile, the director didn't make like any of those decisions. You made them all by yourself. And you were like, what is happening here? This is so weird. And I do think that it is like a thing that editors do feel like the underdog because we often aren't thanked or, invited to the parties and stuff like that. But I actually do think that people value us as creative partners. I do think that. But I don't know what you guys think.
I think it changed. Definitely did get better. I agree with you. There's a lot of, like I said, it varies. You do get productions or the producers or that channel that you get spoken around. So just press there, just do that. You don't have a name, just make it. And there's no consideration for your creativity or what you bring in. You'd still find that, but I think it did change. I think a couple of years ago, we went through this thing where everybody just suddenly went, DOPs are everything. Oh my goodness, DOPs are the things. That's what makes the show look good or bad. I think it is slightly changing now that people are now like, oh, hold on, there's this little guy's in a dark room. If you have a good guy there, wow, it actually changes it. So there's a slight change of, I think we are getting a little bit more recognition for what we do and that we can have a big impact on how the show looks like. But you do still get that weird little, you get talked around like you're just like a monkey pressing a button.
I do find that like as an individual and also as part of Sage and Melissa, I think you weigh in here as well. People are always phoning and saying, do you know a good editor? I need a good editor. So there's definitely an understanding that you want a good editor. And if you don't have a good editor, it's going to negatively impact your project.
I agree. Yeah, that definitely has changed in the last few years. Yeah.
It's always been like that because of the misunderstanding of what we do. I mean, so many times I've had, back in the day when online editing was the thing, and I've had people say, oh, you don't need a good offline editor. You need a good online editor. because they didn't understand what it is that we were doing. Because you
Yeah.
can put all the beautiful colors, but if it's not working, it's still not working.
I sometimes feel like people only know what a good editor is once they've really experienced like a bad edit. Not necessarily a bad editor, but a bad edit process. I think the industry still has a long way to go in respecting the art of editing.
What are you most proud of as an editor? And it can be a project or a scene.
It changes all the time. And maybe I should put it this way, that other than the final product, the film itself,
Yeah.
I find I'm much more satisfied by the process and the experience of the process. So that has something that makes me even forget that I wasn't paid well. Because, do you know what I mean? It's like money can never be enough, but this experience. But what it then does, it almost propels me to the next job. Almost like I want to do more of it. You know, I want to do the next one. And it works like milestones. So just to put it in a nutshell, I would say something like Yizo, which I had been editing, but it was probably the big success in terms of acceptance and all of that. It was quite a thing. So it's a milestone. And then I move from there, and then I do other things. And then, of course, I get to do the first feature film. It's another milestone, and so on and so on. So it's not really one project, and it's not really a particular scene within the project, but it's the relationships I have managed to form and the experiences I've had in these projects that are still making me want to do what I want to do.
Follow that, guys.
Such a great answer, Vuyani. I mean, I was also sort of struggling, and I couldn't land on a single like project or scene. But like I thought about one film I did many years ago, Zama Zama, and it was set in a mine shaft, you know, and so it kind of was always about like, how do you keep like geographical orientation when all you have to give the audience is an eye line and a miner's lamp on a helmet, you know? And so that was an interesting like thought, which almost happened in hindsight, I think, to being immersed in the project. I don't remember being conscious about it, but having had conversations later, and then I was speaking with a wildlife editor who was talking about how she was cutting an underwater project. It was a similar kind of concept, and so like finding similarity in other people's work of like thinking through things and just each project being unique and bringing different like levels of joy and excitement.
I think for me, where I get the most joy out of this job is if somebody sends me a message or sees me and says, I watched the thing that you did and I really liked it, because, you know, the whole point is the audience, like what they think about it. And so, you know, people's time is precious, and if they take an hour to watch something that you did, and then on top of that, they go out of their way to text you or say something to you, I think that's really, really lovely. So that's where I get the most joy out of this job.
I think there's a lot of things that pop up. I think, like you guys said, is like, so one of the proudest things are like seeing your assistants. I think that's something I'm very proud of, like seeing your assistants growing the last 5-10 years and now editing internationally. Like that is something I find that really moves me a lot to see that. Like that's something that I'm really proud of. And then work-wise, it's a hard one. There was this short film we did with a friend called Swijsbro, which in Afrikaans, for a little, like literally we shot it in 2 days, edited in a week. And we got all the creative freedom. We could just do whatever we want on this little independent thing for the Soul Scam. I think there was always something weird about that show, that little movie, that I just connected to me. Like, we were really proud of that. And then I think there was a very famous telenovela we did where we, like we said, we have like 1 week to kind of do an ep, and we had no time, barely saw everybody, and the ep went on to go to like Emmy, and it's like, wow, how quickly that turned around. Like that, you're kind of proud of how on the small budgets and the time you could reach out that far. And then I think then I mentioned like the show I just finished where we did 52 episodes in 1 year, and that was the biggest job I had in my life, and it was so quick. But you stand by it, you go with it, and the people, like you guys said, it's the relationships you have. It's like, I've done it with my best friends, and we're also proud of it. Like, I think that's the highlights that kind of bounce in between, you know, a lot of good memories. Like, I think being an industry kid, growing up with that, it's like, that's the thing, is the people in the film industry is so unique, especially in South Africa. We have such a beautiful culture of people, and we are always, I think everybody always says when you're on set, our crews are so friendly and so helping and stuff, and it comes across, and I'm really proud to be part of that. And when we succeed, oh, I love that. I really, really have. I think that's the happiest things in the career, the highlights so far. It's kind of having that, even though we have no money and we're struggling, we put out content that we can be proud of, and it's on a standard, and it's like people scratch their heads like, how did you guys do that? And like, yeah, I think that's kind of the highlight.
You need to report to the disciplinary committee next week. You can't be promoting doing films in 1 week.
How many movies? The movie is very old, but I'll take my commission. Like we
just can't. Disciplinary committee next week.
Who are your idols? Who do you admire?
That's another tough one, Avril. I mean, again, they come and go. Actually, the other day I just watched Jackie Brown, and it just reminded me how Sally Menke was so great. I mean, the simplicity was just... And Joe Walker, I like him right now. And I would say Thelma Schoonmaker and Michael Kahn.
Same thing. It's like, I think I grew up, I think the first editor when I realized what editing was, Michael Kahn. Of course, Thelma, like, it's just unbelievable how she edits. Timing is crazy. But a guy that really, really stuck with me, which really got me very interested into editing, is Kirk Baxter. There's something in his rhythm that really speaks to me. How he assembles scenes. I think of The Killer, that opening sequence, it's just insane. Like the coverage and how he makes it work, and the rhythm is something that really bends my mind. And then of course, Joe Walker. So I think that's kind of the guys. And I think someone else, like, just out of, also again, a pacing kind of thing, is Dylan Tishner, I think is her name. He did There Will Be Blood and stuff like that. That just the pacing of like movies of that is unbelievable. But I would say number one, Kirk Baxter is kind of big inspiration of how he assembles scenes.
I would have loved to have met Avril Beukes. Oh my God. Like, for me, like, I really admire her. Like, when I saw Out of Sight with Jennifer Lopez and George Clooney, it really stuck with me, like the choices she made and how bold they felt. And then when I realized, wow, this isn't like a young woman, this is like a mature woman who has like incredible filmography, it blew my mind even more, actually, just to be like that sharp with her tool set, you know, and to then watch interviews with her, and her, like, priceless. Her wit, her humor, you know, like, I just would have loved to have met her. Like, she's definitely a hero amongst other people that I admire, whatever, but she always sticks out, just extra.
I'm like the opposite of a film buff. I can never remember anybody's names, and the actors I can never remember. So this is a terrible at parties, people will try to do movie trivia with me, and I'm like, so that is not my strong point. But I think that I've had incredible experiences in my working relationship. Anita Kana and Riyad Desai were incredible to work with. Megan Gill has been incredible to work with. Enver Samuels, his impact strategy with his films that he takes across the whole of South Africa, I'm very in awe of. Collaborating with the guys at Idea Candy, I love it, and they introduced me to a whole bunch of interesting directors. Working with Melissa, I just feel like the community that I have met in the filmmakers in South Africa, I've just been very lucky, and I can remember their names and faces. And yeah, I think they're wonderful.
In the ACE International Committee, we always look at how much we have in common. We may be working very far apart, but there's so much we have in common. And then there are so many factors that are different. But speaking to the four of you, it feels almost like we're coming closer together. I'm very grateful for you, for your time, for the dedication, for the commitment to this. Thank you very much.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
So nice to be with all of you.
Yeah. Fellow editors.
Go back to work now.